"Get your hands off me." The words cut through the lobby like a blade. Two security guards gripped his arms, dragging him toward the door like a criminal. No warrant, no explanation. Just cold metal cuffs biting into his wrists. The hotel manager smiled, arms crossed. "Room service isn't for people like you." Guests froze. Phones rose. The whole world was about to watch. But here's the thing. The man they were throwing out. He owned every inch of that hotel. Every chandelier. Every paycheck. Every marble tile beneath their feet. And he was about to fire them all. Before we continue, drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Marcus Webb had learned something about power a long time ago. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a name tag. It doesn't need to. That's why, on a Thursday evening in late October, the CEO of Horizon Hotels International walked into his own flagship property wearing a brown leather jacket, faded jeans, and a pair of sneakers he'd owned for 6 years. No driver, no assistant, no entourage, just a man who wanted to see the truth. For 3 months, reports had crossed his desk, complaints buried in customer service logs, whispers from regional managers who didn't want to put anything in writing. Stories about guests being treated differently depending on how they looked. Stories about cold shoulders at the front desk, slow service in the restaurant doors that seemed to close faster for certain people. Marcus had built this company from nothing. 27 years ago, he'd started with a single motel outside of Memphis. 63 rooms, a leaking roof, a staff of 4, including himself. Now Horizon operated 214 properties across North America, 12,000 employees, a brand built on one promise. Every guest matters, but promises mean nothing if the people wearing your uniform don't believe them. So tonight, Marcus was going to find out what his staff really believed. He pushed through the revolving glass doors and felt the familiar rush of conditioned air. The lobby was everything he'd designed it to be: high ceilings, soft lighting, the gentle murmur of a fountain somewhere behind the concierge desk. He didn't pause to admire it. He walked straight to the front counter, where a young woman in a crisp blazer was typing something into her computer. "Good evening," Marcus said. "I'd like to order room service. Carter Suite, 1702. The clerk looked up. Her eyes moved over him quickly. Jacket, jeans, sneakers. Her smile didn't quite reach her face. "One moment, sir." She turned away without another word and disappeared through a door behind the counter. Marcus waited. 1 minute passed, then 2. A businessman in a tailored suit approached the counter from the other end. A different clerk appeared instantly, all warmth and efficiency. "Good evening, Mr. Patterson. Your usual suite is ready. Can I have someone bring up your luggage?" The businessman nodded, barely acknowledging the service he expected to receive. Marcus kept waiting. 3 minutes now. The first clerk returned, but she wasn't alone. A woman in her late 40s followed, taller, sharper, with the practiced smile of someone who had learned to weaponize hospitality. "I'm Mrs. Thornton, the floor manager," she announced. "There seems to be some confusion with your reservation." "No confusion," Marcus said evenly. "Carter, Suite 1702. I confirmed this morning." Mrs. Thornton's fingers moved across the keyboard, but her eyes stayed on him. "I'm not seeing any authorization for that suite under your name." "Check again." "I've checked twice, sir." Her voice carried a new edge now. "Perhaps you have the wrong hotel. This is the Horizon Grand Atlanta. I'm in the right place." "Well," she clasped her hands in front of her. "Our premium suites require verified guest status. I can't simply take your word for it." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a black card, the company's highest-tier membership, issued only to executives and select VIP guests. He placed it on the counter. "This should clear up any confusion." Mrs. Thornton picked up the card with 2 fingers, as if it might be contaminated. She examined it for a long moment, then handed it to the clerk beside her. "Run this," she said quietly, "and flag it." The clerk hesitated. "Flag it. You heard me. Marcus didn't react. He'd expected resistance. He hadn't expected it to come this fast. Is there a problem? He asked. Mrs. Thornton's smile returned thinner now. We've had incidents, Mr. Carter. People presenting credentials they can't verify. I'm sure you understand. We have to protect our legitimate guests. Protect them from what exactly? She didn't answer. The clerk returned something uncertain flickering across her face. Ma'am, the card is valid. It's showing owner-level clearance. Mrs. Thornton's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's not possible. Run it again. I ran it twice. I said run it again. The clerk retreated to her terminal. Mrs. Thornton turned back to Marcus, her composure cracking at the edges. Sir, I don't know where you obtained that card, but I assure you this hotel has protocols. We can't allow unauthorized individuals access to our executive suites simply because they flash a piece of plastic. Unauthorized, Marcus repeated. That's correct. And what makes me unauthorized? The question hung in the air between them. Mrs. Thornton's smile flickered. I think you know. I'd like you to say it. Sir, I don't have time for games. Either provide proper identification, or I'll have to ask you to leave. Marcus reached for his wallet. He pulled out his driver's license and placed it next to the card. Marcus Webb. Same name on the card. Same name on the reservation. Is that sufficient? Mrs. Thornton glanced at the license. Something shifted in her expression, not recognition but calculation. She was trying to figure out her next move. Mr. Webb, she said slowly, I appreciate your patience, but our system isn't showing a valid reservation. Without that, I simply cannot grant you access to a premium suite. Call your general manager. Excuse me. Your general manager, David Chen. Call him. The name landed hard. Mrs. Thornton's face went pale for just a moment before she recovered. Mr. Chen is not available this evening. Then call whoever's in charge. I'll wait. Sir, I really don't think... You've accused me of fraud in front of your guests. You've questioned my identity. You've refused service without any legitimate reason. Marcus leaned forward slightly. I'd say that warrants a conversation with management. Wouldn't you? Mrs. Thornton's smile had vanished completely now. Her eyes darted to the clerk, to the guests lingering nearby, to the phones that were starting to rise in the periphery. She was losing control of the situation, and she knew it. Security, she called out. I need security to the front desk. Marcus didn't move. That's your answer. Sir, you're creating a disturbance. I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the counter. I ordered room service. That's all I did. And I've explained that we cannot verify your reservation. Now please. You verified it. Your clerk just told you. Owner-level clearance. Mrs. Thornton's voice rose. That card is obviously fraudulent. People like you don't have owner-level access. That's simply not how this works. People like you. The words echoed across the marble floor. Conversations nearby went quiet. A woman with a rolling suitcase stopped mid-step and stared. Marcus felt the familiar weight settle into his chest, that old pressure he'd carried since he was 22 years old, working double shifts at a motel in Tennessee, saving every dollar for a dream no one believed in. He'd felt it the first time a guest refused to let him carry their bags because they assumed he was there to rob them. He'd felt it at 30 when a bank officer denied his loan application without even reading his business plan. He'd felt it at 41 when he walked into a conference room full of investors and watched them check their watches before he even opened his mouth. The weight never got lighter. You just learned to carry it differently. People like me, Marcus said quietly. What kind of people would that be? Mrs. Thornton's face flushed. I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said. 2 security guards appeared from a corridor to the left. Big men, professional hands already reaching for their belts. What's the situation? The first one asked. Mrs. Thornton straightened. This individual is attempting to access a suite using fraudulent credentials. He's refused to leave voluntarily. That's not true, Marcus said. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the counter. The guard's voice was calm but firm. Let's handle this quietly. I'd be happy to, once she processes my room service order. Sir, I'm a guest at this hotel, Suite 1702. Your manager refuses to verify what your own system has already confirmed. The guard glanced at Mrs. Thornton. Ma'am, he's lying, she said flatly. Remove him. I'm not lying. Check the system yourself. We don't have access to reservation systems, sir. We follow manager directives. Then ask her why she's lying. Mrs. Thornton's voice turned sharp. That's enough. I want him out. Now. The second guard moved forward. His hand closed around Marcus's arm, and that's when everything shifted. Not because Marcus resisted. He didn't. He let them take his arm, let them position him like they'd done this 100 times before. What shifted was the room itself. A young man in a hoodie, couldn't have been older than 25, raised his phone and hit record. The red dot blinked in the corner of his screen. Yo, he said to no one in particular. Are you seeing this? A woman near the elevator did the same. Then an older gentleman by the fountain. Then a couple checking in at the far end of the counter. Within seconds, half a dozen phones were pointed at Marcus Webb, capturing every moment of his removal. Mrs. Thornton noticed. Her smile flickered back, but it was different now, nervous, uncertain. This is a private matter, she announced to the room. Please respect our guest's privacy. He's not being treated like a guest, the young man said. You're throwing him out. He's not a verified guest. He's trespassing. He showed you ID. He showed you a card. What else do you want? That's not your concern. Lady, I'm live streaming this to 40,000 people. It's definitely my concern. The number landed like a punch. Mrs. Thornton's face went white. Turn that off, immediately. Make me. Marcus watched the exchange with something close to detachment. He'd seen this play out before in different lobbies under different lights. The script was always the same denial-escalation exposure. The only difference was the audience. 20 years ago, there would have been no phones, no witnesses, just his word against theirs. Now the whole world was watching. The guard's grip tightened on his arm. Sir, let's go. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not resisting, Marcus said calmly. But I want you to understand something. What's that? You're about to make a very serious mistake. The guard almost laughed. Sir, with all due respect, you're the one in cuffs. Not yet. Give it 30 seconds. Marcus looked at him. Really looked the way you look at someone whose life is about to change, and they don't even know it yet. What's your name? The guard hesitated. Henderson. Henderson, do you have a family? That's none of your business. Kids. Sir. I'm asking because in about 10 minutes you're going to wish you'd asked more questions before following orders. And I want you to remember this moment, when you had a chance to choose differently. Henderson's grip loosened just slightly. Doubt flickered across his face. Sir, I don't know what you think is going to happen here, but... Marcus. A new voice cut through the tension. Everyone turned. A young woman had stepped out from behind the front desk, the clerk who'd first greeted him, the one Mrs. Thornton had ordered to run his card 3 times. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. His name is Marcus Webb. The card is legitimate. I pulled his file. She swallowed hard. He's the owner. Of the hotel. Of the whole chain. Silence crashed over the lobby like a wave. Mrs. Thornton laughed a short, sharp sound, more panic than humor. That's absurd. Elena, get back to your station. It's in the system. Owner override clearance. Direct line to the board. Elena's hands were shaking, but she didn't move. I saw it myself. She's confused. The system must be glitched. There's no glitch. Elena's voice rose. I ran it 4 times. 4. He's telling the truth. He owns this hotel. The words hit the room like a detonation. The young man with the phone let out a low whistle. Holy shit. The woman by the elevator covered her mouth. Oh my God. Henderson released Marcus's arm as if it had burned him. He stepped back, face ashen. Sir, I didn't know. Marcus didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on Mrs. Thornton, who had gone completely still. You were saying, Marcus said quietly, something about people like me. Mrs. Thornton opened her mouth. Nothing came out. About how we don't have owner-level access. About how that's simply not how this works. There must have been a mistake. The only mistake was yours. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He pressed a single button. The line connected instantly. Rachel. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional. I'm here, sir. Conference in legal. And the board. Already done. They're standing by. Mrs. Thornton took a step back. What is this? This, Marcus said, is accountability. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word carried the weight of 27 years of every door slammed in his face, every doubt he'd swallowed, every assumption he'd outlasted. You wanted to know who I am. Now you do. He turned to face the room, the guests, the phones, the guards, the staff frozen behind the counter. And so does everyone else. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the fountain seemed to hold its breath. Marcus looked at Henderson, then at the second guard, then at Elena, who was still trembling but standing her ground. I gave you a chance, he said softly. All of you. A chance to do the right thing. Some of you took it. Some of you didn't. His gaze settled on Mrs. Thornton. And now, everyone's going to see exactly which choice you made. The phone in his hand was still live. Rachel's voice came through clearly enough for the nearest guests to hear. Sir, the board has authorized full protocol. What are your instructions? Marcus didn't blink. Terminate their access. All of them. Effective immediately. The words fell like a hammer. And in that moment, the floor manager who had built her career on small cruelties and quiet assumptions realized the truth. She should have understood from the beginning. The man she'd tried to erase was the only one in the room with the power to make people disappear. And he was just getting started. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Terminate their access. All of them. Effective immediately. Mrs. Thornton's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter as if the marble might somehow anchor her to the life she'd known 5 minutes ago. You can't do that, she finally managed. You can't just... I already did. Rachel's voice crackled through the phone speaker, calm and clinical. Processing now. Manager credentials revoked. Security override initiated. System access terminated for Thornton, Henderson, Martinez, and Blake. A sharp beep echoed from the computer terminal behind the front desk. Then another. Then a cascade of error tones that sounded almost like an alarm. The junior clerk, the one who'd smirked when she said room service isn't for people like him, lunged for her keyboard. Her fingers flew across the keys, but the screen flashed red with each attempt. I'm locked out, she whispered. I can't. Nothing's working. That's the point, Marcus said. Henderson took another step back, his hand falling away from his belt. The confidence that had filled his posture moments ago had drained completely. He looked smaller now, uncertain. Sir, I was just doing my job. She told me to. She told you to remove a guest who had done nothing wrong. And you didn't ask a single question. I didn't know who you were. That's exactly the problem. Marcus turned to face him fully. You didn't know. You didn't care. All you saw was a black man in a jacket that didn't meet your expectations, and you decided that was enough. That my clothes told you everything you needed to know about whether I belonged here. Henderson's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Fair. Marcus almost laughed. You were about to put me in handcuffs for ordering dinner. You want to talk to me about fair? The guard had no answer. Behind the counter, Mrs. Thornton had recovered enough to find her voice again. It came out high and strained, nothing like the polished authority she'd wielded minutes earlier. This is retaliation. You can't fire people without cause. There are procedures, there are labor laws. There are also policies against discrimination. Marcus cut in. Policies I wrote myself. Policies that every employee in this company signs on their first day. He paused. Did you read them, Mrs. Thornton? Or did you assume they didn't apply to you? I didn't discriminate against anyone. I was following protocol. What protocol requires you to run a valid membership card 4 times? I was being thorough. You were being selective. Marcus stepped closer to the counter. I watched you process Mr. Patterson in under 30 seconds. No questions, no verification, just a smile and a room key. What made him different from me? Mrs. Thornton's face flushed. He's a regular guest. So am I. I stay at this property twice a month. My name is in your system. My photo is in your system. My authorization level is higher than anyone else who's ever walked through those doors. He tilted his head. But you didn't recognize me, or you chose not to. I've never seen you before. You've never looked. The words landed like a slap. Mrs. Thornton flinched. In the crowd, phones continued to record. The young man in the hoodie, Marcus would later learn his name was Keith, had moved closer, his live stream comments scrolling faster than he could read. 47,000 watching now, Keith announced. And climbing. Mrs. Thornton spun toward him. Turn that off. This is harassment. Lady, you just tried to arrest the guy who owns the building. That's not harassment. That's journalism. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the lobby. Someone near the elevator muttered, "She's done." Marcus didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in this moment, no triumph. Just the cold weight of a truth he'd known for decades, finally being witnessed by others. He turned to Elena, who was still standing apart from the other staff, her face pale but resolute. You, he said. What's your name? Elena. Elena Vasquez. How long have you worked here? 8 months. And in those 8 months, have you seen this kind of thing before? Guests treated differently based on how they look. Elena hesitated. Her eyes darted to Mrs. Thornton, then back to Marcus. Answer honestly, he said. I'm not asking as your employer. I'm asking as someone who needs to know the truth. The young woman swallowed hard. When she spoke, her voice trembled, but the words came out clear. Yes, I've seen it. Not every day, but often enough. Certain guests get questioned more, asked for extra ID, told there are no rooms available when there are. It's not official, it's just how things work here, how they've always worked as long as I've been here. And did you report it? I tried. Once, Mrs. Thornton told me I was being oversensitive, that I didn't understand the realities of hospitality management. Marcus nodded slowly. And what did you think? I thought she was wrong. Elena's chin lifted slightly. I thought it was wrong. But I needed this job. I have student loans. My mom is sick. I couldn't afford to push back. So you stayed quiet? Yes. Her voice cracked. I'm not proud of it. But tonight you spoke up. Tonight was different. Tonight I saw someone being treated like a criminal for no reason at all, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore, even if it cost me everything. Marcus studied her for a long moment. The lobby had gone completely silent, every eye fixed on the exchange. It won't cost you everything, he said finally. It might be the thing that saves you. Elena blinked, confusion crossing her face. What do you mean? I mean that in about 10 minutes there's going to be a significant restructuring of this property's management. And I'm going to need people I can trust, people who understand that doing the right thing matters more than following orders. Behind the counter, Mrs. Thornton made a strangled sound. "You're promoting her? She's been here less than a year. She's been here long enough to know the difference between right and wrong, which is more than I can say for you. This is insane. You can't run a hotel based on some bleeding heart fantasy about fairness. There are standards. There are expectations. Our guests expect a certain... Your guests." Marcus's voice dropped low, dangerous. "These are my guests. This is my hotel. And the only standard that matters here is the one I set. Which, in case you've forgotten, includes treating every single person who walks through those doors with dignity and respect. Regardless of what they're wearing. Regardless of what they look like. Regardless of what assumptions you've made about them before they even open their mouths." Mrs. Thornton's hands were shaking now. "I've given 12 years to this company. 12 years. And you're going to destroy my career because of one misunderstanding." This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. Every word you said, every order you gave, every assumption you made, those were choices. And choices have consequences. "Please." Her voice broke. "I have a family. I have a mortgage. You can't do this to me." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. He knew what it felt like to be afraid, to feel your whole world tilting beneath your feet. But he also knew what it felt like to be the one pushed down, to have your dignity stripped away by someone who never even bothered to learn your name. 12 years ago, he said quietly, "I walked into a hotel in Memphis. I was wearing a suit that time. My best suit. The only one I owned. I had a meeting with investors, people who could have funded my first major expansion. I was nervous, but I was ready. I'd prepared for months." The lobby listened in silence. I walked up to the front desk and gave my name. The manager looked at me the same way you looked at me tonight, like I was something that had wandered in from the street, like I couldn't possibly belong in a place that nice. Marcus paused, letting the memory settle. "She told me there was no reservation under my name. She told me the restaurant was fully booked. She told me, and I'll never forget this, that perhaps I'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere that catered to a different clientele." Mrs. Thornton's face had gone gray. "I missed that meeting. The investors left. The deal fell through. It took me another 3 years to recover, to find new funding to rebuild what that one night had cost me." He stepped closer to the counter. "Do you know what that manager's name was?" Mrs. Thornton didn't answer. "It doesn't matter. I'm sure she's forgotten all about it. It was probably just another Tuesday for her. Just another day of deciding who belonged and who didn't, based on nothing but her own prejudice." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But I never forgot. I never forgot what it felt like to be erased, to be dismissed, to have everything I'd worked for reduced to nothing, because someone looked at me and decided I wasn't worth their time." Mrs. Thornton's eyes were wet now. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know. That's different." He straightened, addressing the room. "I built this company on a promise. A promise that what happened to me would never happen to anyone else. That every person who walked into a Horizon property would be treated with dignity, regardless of their background, their appearance, their circumstances." His gaze swept across the guests, the staff, the phones still recording. Tonight, that promise was broken, and everyone here witnessed it. From his phone, Rachel's voice cut through the silence. "Sir, the board is on the line. They're requesting a statement. Tell them I'll address them in person. Tomorrow morning. Full executive session." "Understood. Anything else?" Marcus looked at Mrs. Thornton, then at Henderson, then at the junior clerk who had gone completely silent. "Yes. Contact HR. I want exit packages prepared for all 3. Standard severance, nothing more. And I want their NDAs voided." Rachel paused. "Voided, sir, that's unusual." "I want them free to tell their side of the story. To anyone who asks. To any reporter, Any lawyer, any court. Let them explain exactly what happened here tonight and why they made the choices they made. Mrs. Thornton's face crumpled. You're setting us up. I'm giving you the chance you never gave me, the chance to be heard. Marcus's voice was cold. Whether anyone believes you is another matter. The young man with the phone, Keith, let out a low whistle. Damn, that's not revenge. That's justice. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Someone started clapping. Then another person. Then another. Within seconds, the lobby was filled with applause. Not the polite, perfunctory kind. Real applause. The kind that comes from people who've seen something they'll remember for the rest of their lives. Marcus didn't acknowledge it. He turned away from the counter and walked toward the center of the lobby, where the fountain still whispered its endless song. Henderson caught up with him. The guard's face was ashen, his earlier authority completely dissolved. Sir, Mr. Webb, I need you to know. I didn't mean for this to happen. I was following orders. I know. I have a family. 2 kids. They're in school, I know. Henderson's voice cracked. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all? Marcus stopped walking. He turned to face the guard, really looked at him the way he'd looked at him before when he'd asked about his family. Do you remember what I said to you when you were about to put the cuffs on? Henderson nodded miserably. You said I'd wish I'd asked more questions. And did you? No, I did what I was told. Why? The guard struggled for words. Because she's the manager. Because that's how it works. Because it was easier. Henderson looked at the floor. Yeah, I guess it was. Marcus let the silence stretch for a moment. Around them, the lobby had quieted again, everyone straining to hear. I'm not going to destroy your life, Marcus said finally. You made a mistake, a serious one. But you didn't make it alone, and you weren't the one giving orders. Hope flickered in Henderson's eyes. Does that mean? It means you're suspended, 30 days, without pay. You'll undergo mandatory training on bias recognition and guest relations. After that, if you pass the evaluation, you can return to work. Not at this property. I'm transferring you to our training facility in Arizona. You'll start over. From the bottom. Henderson's shoulders sagged. That's more than I deserve. Probably. But I believe in second chances. Marcus paused. I've needed a few myself over the years. The question is whether you'll use yours. I will. I swear I will. Don't swear it to me. Swear it to the next person you're tempted to judge based on how they look. Swear it to your kids when you explain to them why Daddy was wrong and what he learned from it. Henderson nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Marcus didn't respond. He turned away and continued toward the fountain, leaving the guard standing alone in the middle of the lobby. The young woman Elena approached hesitantly. She'd left the safety of the front desk and was crossing the marble floor with careful steps as if walking on thin ice. Mr. Webb, he turned. Yes. I just wanted to say, what you did back there, for Henderson, that was unexpected. Was it? Most people in your position, they'd want blood. They'd want to make an example out of everyone. Would that have made things better? Elena considered the question. No, probably not, but it would have been satisfying. Satisfaction is temporary. Change is permanent. Marcus gestured to the lobby around them. Everyone in this room is going to remember tonight. They're going to remember what they saw, what they heard, what they felt. That memory will shape how they treat people for the rest of their lives. That's worth more than revenge. But Mrs. Thornton made her choices a long time ago. Tonight was just the night those choices caught up with her. He paused. Some people can change. Some people have made too many compromises for too long. The hard part is knowing which is which. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question that had clearly been burning in her mind. Why did you do this? Come in disguised, I mean. Why not just send someone run a secret shopper program like every other company? Marcus almost smiled. Because reports can be sanitized, data can be manipulated, but experience is something else entirely. So you wanted to feel it yourself. I needed to. This company bears my name, my values, my promise. If that promise was being broken, I had to know. Really know. Not from a spreadsheet, not from a consultant's summary, from the look in someone's eyes when they decided I didn't belong. Elena shook her head slowly. That's either incredibly brave or incredibly masochistic. Maybe both. Marcus glanced around the lobby. The truth is, I've been where your guests are. I've been turned away, talked down to made to feel small in spaces I had every right to occupy. Building this company was my way of creating something different, something better. A place where no one would ever feel the way I felt. And tonight proved I still have work to do. From across the lobby, a new voice called out. A man in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a sport coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Mr. Webb. Marcus turned. Yes. The man approached with the careful dignity of someone who'd learned long ago that presence matters more than volume. My name is Walter Hensley. I've been a guest at Horizon Properties for over 20 years, platinum member since 2003. I recognize the name. Thank you for your loyalty. I'm not looking for thanks. Hensley's eyes were sharp, assessing. I'm looking to understand something. Go ahead. I watched what just happened here, every minute of it. And I have to be honest, part of me expected you to tear this place apart. Fire everyone on site. Call in lawyers, make a spectacle. Is that what you would have done? Hensley considered the question. 20 years ago, probably. When you've been disrespected as many times as men like us have been disrespected, there's a certain appeal to scorched earth. But I've learned something over the decades. Anger feels righteous in the moment. It's the easiest emotion in the world to justify, but it rarely builds anything worth having. Marcus nodded slowly. And what does build something worth having? Patience, precision, the willingness to distinguish between people who've made mistakes and people who are mistakes. Hensley gestured toward Henderson, who was still standing where Marcus had left him. That man will never forget what you did for him tonight, the grace you showed. He'll carry that for the rest of his career. That's the hope. It's more than hope, it's investment. You just bought loyalty that can't be purchased with a salary. Hensley extended his hand. I came over here to tell you that I've never been prouder to be a Horizon guest. What you did tonight, that's leadership. Real leadership. Marcus shook his hand. I appreciate that, Mr. Hensley. More than you know. Walter, please. After what I've just witnessed, I think we're past formalities. A small smile crossed Marcus's face. Walter, then. The older man glanced toward the front desk, where Mrs. Thornton was being escorted toward a back office by two members of the assistant staff. Her face was blank now, all the fight drained out of her. What happens to this place now? Walter asked. New management, obviously. But beyond that we rebuild. We examine every policy, every training program, every assumption that led to tonight, and we make sure it never happens again. A tall order. The only kind worth pursuing. Walter smiled. You remind me of myself 40 years ago, before the world taught me to be cynical. The world tried to teach me that too. I just never learned. A comfortable silence settled between them. Then Walter patted Marcus on the shoulder and stepped back. I'll let you get back to it, but I meant what I said. If you ever need a character witness, a board recommendation, or just someone to have a drink with and complain about how hard it is to find good people, you have my card. Use it. I will. Walter walked away, rejoining a woman who must have been his wife near the elevator. She took his arm, leaning in to whisper something. He nodded, glancing back at Marcus with something like admiration. The lobby was beginning to empty now. Guests drifted toward the restaurant, the bar, the elevators. The crisis was over. Life was resuming its normal rhythms. But for Marcus, the night was far from finished. His phone buzzed. Rachel again. "Sir, CNN is requesting a statement. So is the Times, the Post, and about 40 local affiliates. Tell them I'll issue a statement tomorrow, after I've had time to review everything. They're going to run the story regardless. I know. Let them. The videos speak for themselves." "Understood. One more thing, your suite is ready. I took the liberty of having room service prepared. The chef wanted me to tell you it's on the house." Marcus almost laughed. On the house. In my own hotel. He was insistent. Said it was the least he could do. "Tell him thank you. And tell him I'll be up in 20 minutes. There's something I need to do first." He ended the call and turned back toward the front desk where Elena was standing alone, the other staff having retreated to deal with the chaos Mrs. Thornton had left behind. She looked up as he approached. "Mr. Webb. That training program I mentioned, the restructuring, I wasn't just making empty promises." "I didn't think you were." "Good, because starting tomorrow you're going to be very busy." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, plain white, black text, nothing fancy. "This is my direct line, not the corporate number, mine. If you see something wrong, if you hear something that doesn't sit right, if anyone in a position of authority tells you to look the other way, you call me. Day or night. Understood?" Elena took the card with trembling fingers. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." He held her gaze. "You stood up tonight when it would have been easier to stay silent. That took courage. The kind of courage this company needs. Don't lose it." "I won't. I promise." "Don't promise me. Just do it." He turned to go, then paused. "And Elena." "Yes. That raise you've been waiting for, the one Mrs. Thornton kept blocking. Check your account tomorrow morning." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing at the counter with tears streaming down her face and a business card clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Behind him, the lobby of the Horizon Grand Atlanta continued its quiet recovery. Staff whispered in corners. Guests exchanged knowing glances. Somewhere a phone notification chimed another viewer, sharing the video that was already spreading across the internet like wildfire. But Marcus didn't look back. He'd done what he came to do. He'd seen what he needed to see. And now, for the first time in hours, he was ready to rest. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. He stepped inside and pressed the button for the 17th floor. As the doors closed, he caught his reflection in the polished metal, a man in a brown leather jacket and faded jeans, standing alone in a box of light. No one looking at him would have guessed he owned the building. That was the point. That had always been the point. The elevator hummed as it climbed. Marcus leaned against the back wall and closed his eyes. The adrenaline that had carried him through the last 2 hours was beginning to fade, leaving behind something heavier, something older. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. The doors opened on 17. He stepped out into the hallway and walked toward Suite 1702, the same suite he'd reserved under the name Carter, the same suite Mrs. Thornton had insisted didn't exist in her system. The keycard worked on the first try. Of course it did. Inside the room was everything a flagship suite should be, spacious, elegant, carefully appointed. A bottle of wine sat on the table with a handwritten note from the chef. The curtains were drawn back to reveal the Atlanta skyline lights glittering against the darkness. Marcus didn't look at any of it. He sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at his hands. They were steady. They'd been steady all night, even when the cuffs had clicked against his wrists. Even when Mrs. Thornton had looked at him like he was something to be scraped off her shoe. But now, alone in the silence, he felt the tremor start. Deep in his chest, spreading outward. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked. 37 missed calls. 92 text messages. His inbox was exploding with media requests, board member inquiries, messages from regional managers who'd seen the videos and wanted to know what the hell was happening. He set the phone face down on the nightstand and pressed his palms against his eyes. 47 years old. CEO of a company worth billions. A name that opened doors across the country. And still, after everything, a woman had looked at him and seen nothing but a threat. The knock on the door startled him. "Mr. Webb." A familiar voice. "It's Elena. I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something you should see." He crossed the room and opened the door. Elena stood in the hallway, her face pale, a tablet clutched against her chest. "I know you wanted to rest," she said quickly, "but this couldn't wait." "What is it?" She turned the tablet toward him. On the screen, a news broadcast was playing CNN by the look of it. The anchor was speaking over footage that Marcus recognized immediately. His own face, the lobby, the moment Henderson had grabbed his arm. "It's everywhere," Elena said. "Every network. Trending on every platform. The videos from tonight have been viewed over 8 million times in the last hour." Marcus took the tablet and watched. The footage cut between multiple angles Keith's live stream, the tourists recording a security camera feed that someone had apparently leaked. The anchor's voice provided commentary, but Marcus barely heard it. What he heard was Mrs. Thornton's voice. "Room service isn't for people like him. People like him pull this all the time. You don't look like someone who belongs in a penthouse suite." Each phrase hit like a hammer blow. Hearing them again removed from the heat of the moment, they sounded even worse. More calculated, more cruel. "The comments," Elena said quietly. "They're overwhelming. People are sharing their own stories. Times they were discriminated against at hotels, restaurants, stores. It's becoming something bigger than just tonight." Marcus handed the tablet back to her. "I expected the coverage. I didn't expect it this fast." "The internet doesn't sleep." She hesitated. "There's something else. Tell me." "Mrs. Thornton. She's still in the building. Security tried to escort her out, but she's refusing to leave. She's in the manager's office, and she's threatening to sue." Marcus almost laughed. "Sue? For what?" "Wrongful termination. She says you humiliated her in front of witnesses, that you violated company procedures by firing her on the spot without HR approval. The board authorized the termination before I even announced it." "She doesn't know that, or she doesn't care." Elena's jaw tightened. "She's been on the phone for the last 30 minutes. I don't know who she's talking to, but she keeps saying something about going to the press with her side of the story." "I told her she could. I voided her NDA myself." "I know, but I don't think she's planning to tell the truth. I think she's planning to spin it. Make herself look like the victim." Marcus considered this for a moment. The fatigue was pressing against him, urging him to let it go, to deal with it tomorrow, to let the lawyers handle whatever came next. But something in Elena's expression stopped him. "What aren't you telling me?" She looked down at the tablet, then back up at him. "Before tonight, before any of this happened, Mrs. Thornton kept a file. On the office computer. It was supposed to be deleted after each incident, but she never actually deleted anything. She just moved it to a hidden folder." "What kind of file?" "Records. Of every guest complaint that mentioned discrimination. Every time someone called to report being treated unfairly. Every survey response that used words like unwelcoming or hostile." Elena swallowed hard. "There are hundreds of entries, Mr. Webb, going back years, and next to each one there's a note. In her handwriting." "What do the notes say?" "Things like handled and resolved and no action required." Elena's voice dropped. "But the complaints were never actually addressed. She just buried them, made them disappear." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus felt something cold settle into his stomach. Not surprised he'd suspected something like this might exist. But seeing it confirmed knowing that the problem went so much deeper than one bad night. "Show me," he said. "Sir, it's late. You should rest. This can wait until—" "Show me." Elena nodded. She turned and walked toward the elevator, Marcus following close behind. The ride down was silent. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the lobby had finally emptied. A few staff members lingered behind the counter, speaking in hushed voices. They fell silent as Marcus passed. The manager's office was at the end of a corridor behind the front desk. The door was closed, but Marcus could hear Mrs. Thornton's voice through the wood, high, and strained the words indistinct, but the tone unmistakable. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open and walked in. Mrs. Thornton was sitting behind the desk, phone pressed to her ear. When she saw him, her face went white. "I'll call you back," she said quickly, and ended the call. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus closed the door behind him. "You should have left when you had the chance." Mrs. Thornton's chin lifted. "I have rights. You can't just throw me out like garbage. I offered you a standard severance package. Most people in your position would consider that generous." "Generous?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You destroyed my career in front of 100 people, in front of cameras. The whole world watched you humiliate me. The whole world watched you humiliate yourself." Marcus stepped closer to the desk. "I just happened to be there. This was entrapment. You came in disguised looking for a reason to fire me. I came in looking for the truth. What I found was worse than I imagined." Mrs. Thornton's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "The file Patricia." He used her first name, deliberately stripping away the last barrier of professional distance. "The one you kept on your computer. The one with all the buried complaints." Her face changed, just slightly, but enough. She knew exactly what he was talking about. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Don't insult my intelligence. Elena found it. The whole thing. Years of documented discrimination swept under the rug because you decided it wasn't worth your time." "Elena had no right to access my personal files." "Your personal files. On a company computer, in a company office." Marcus shook his head. "You really don't understand the position you're in. Do you, Mrs.?" Thornton stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I understand perfectly. You're a man who can't handle being questioned, who needs to control everything and everyone, who uses his money and his power to crush anyone who dares to push back. Is that what you think this is, ego? What else would it be?" Marcus took a long breath. The anger was there, coiled tight in his chest, but he kept it contained. He'd spent a lifetime learning to keep it contained. 12 years ago, he said slowly, a woman named Dorothy Williams stayed at this hotel. She was 73 years old. She'd saved for 2 years to take her grandchildren on a trip to Atlanta. It was supposed to be the highlight of her retirement. Mrs. Thornton frowned. "I don't see what this has to do with—" She filed a complaint, said she was treated rudely at check-in, said the staff made comments about whether she could afford the room she'd booked, said her grandchildren were followed around the lobby by security for no reason. I don't remember every complaint that comes through this office. You should remember this one, because according to your file, you marked it no action required. You wrote a note that said, guest appears confused and unreliable. No evidence of wrongdoing. Mrs. Thornton's jaw tightened. If I made that assessment, I must have had a reason. Dorothy Williams died 3 months later. Heart attack. Her daughter wrote to us after the funeral. She said her mother never got over what happened here, that it haunted her until the end, that she kept telling the family she'd been humiliated in front of her grandchildren, and no one would listen. The room went very quiet. I only found out about it last year, Marcus continued, when I started reviewing customer service records as part of a company-wide audit. The letter was buried in the archives, just like all the others. Mrs. Thornton's face had gone pale. You can't hold me responsible for what happened to one guest years ago. Not one guest, hundreds, maybe thousands. Every time someone walked through those doors and was treated like less than human, you had the power to do something about it. And every time you chose to look away. I was protecting the hotel, protecting the brand. You don't understand what it's like to be on the front lines dealing with difficult people day after day. I understand exactly what it's like. Marcus's voice dropped low. I spent 15 years on the front lines. Cleaning rooms, working the front desk, taking abuse from guests who thought I wasn't worth the air I breathed. The difference is, I never forgot what it felt like. You did. Mrs. Thornton sank back into her chair. The fight was draining out of her, replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "I want you to understand something. This isn't about tonight. Tonight was just the night when everything came together. All the choices you've made over the years, all the complaints you ignored, all the people you decided weren't worth your attention, it all led here. To this moment, to this room. So, what now? You're going to sue me press charges. That depends on you." She looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean you have a choice. You can fight this, hire lawyers, go to the press with whatever story you think will make you look sympathetic. Drag this out for months, maybe years. Or you can do something that might actually matter." Marcus leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. "You know things about this industry that I don't. About how discrimination gets normalized, how it becomes invisible to the people perpetuating it, how it gets woven into policies and procedures until it feels like common sense." Mrs. Thornton's brow furrowed. "You want me to, what, consult for you? I want you to help me fix it. Not here you're finished at Horizon, but there are organizations that work on this kind of thing, training programs, advocacy groups, places where your experience could actually do some good if you were willing to be honest about what you've done and why." She stared at him for a long moment. "You're serious?" "I'm always serious when it comes to this. Why would you offer me anything after what I did to you?" "Because destroying you doesn't help anyone. It just makes me feel better for 5 minutes. But if you could actually change, if you could help prevent even one other person from going through what Dorothy Williams went through, that would mean something. That would last." Mrs. Thornton was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know if I can change. I don't even know if I understand what I did wrong. Not really. Not the way you want me to." "That's honest. More honest than anything you've said tonight." "It doesn't feel like enough." "It's a start." Marcus straightened up. "Take some time. Think about what I said. The severance offer stands. So does the opportunity. What you do with it is up to you." He turned toward the door. "Mr. Webb." He paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About tonight. About all of it." Marcus looked back at her. She seemed smaller now, older. The armor of authority stripped away, leaving only a woman who had spent years making choices she couldn't take back. "Sorry doesn't fix anything," he said. "But it's a place to start." He left the office without looking back. In the corridor, Elena was waiting. She'd heard everything, he could see it in her face. "You offered her a second chance," she said quietly. "After what she did." "I offered her a choice. That's different." "Most people wouldn't have done that. Most people aren't trying to build something that lasts." Marcus started walking toward the lobby. "Burning bridges feels good, but all you're left with is ashes." Elena fell into step beside him. "Do you think she'll take it? The opportunity?" "I don't know. People surprise you sometimes. In both directions." They reached the lobby. It was almost empty now, just a night clerk behind the counter and a single guest crossing toward the elevator. Marcus stopped in the middle of the floor, looking around at the space he'd built. The marble, the fountain, the soft light that was supposed to make everyone feel welcome. "This company is my life's work," he said. "Every decision I've made for the past 27 years has been about building something meaningful, something that would outlast me." Elena waited, sensing he wasn't finished. "But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what was happening in the rooms I couldn't see, the conversations I wasn't part of, the choices being made in my name by people who didn't share my values. That's not your fault. You can't be everywhere." "No, but I can be more careful about who I trust to represent me when I'm not there." He looked at her. "That's why people like you matter. People who are willing to speak up even when it costs them something." Elena's eyes were wet. "I almost didn't. Tonight, I mean. I almost stayed quiet. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." "Then, that's the person you are. The person who speaks up when it matters." Marcus put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't ever let anyone tell you that person isn't valuable. Because they're the only kind of person who can actually change things." His phone buzzed again. This time he looked. A text from Rachel board meeting moved up. "Tomorrow at 8 a.m. They want a full briefing and a plan going forward." He typed back, "I'll be there." "Go home," he told Elena. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day for both of us." "What are you going to do?" "Right now I'm going to go upstairs and eat the dinner I ordered 3 hours ago." A faint smile crossed his face. "Then, I'm going to figure out how to turn the worst night of my professional life into something that actually matters." Elena smiled back, a little uncertain but real. "For what it's worth, I think you already have." She walked toward the employee exit tablet, still clutched against her chest. At the door, she paused and looked back. "Mr. Webb?" "Yes." "Thank you. For not giving up on people, even the ones who don't deserve it." She disappeared through the door before he could respond. Marcus stood alone in the lobby of his hotel, surrounded by the silence of a building that was slowly settling into sleep. His phone buzzed one more time. He glanced at the screen. A message from Keith, the young man who'd been live streaming your video, just hit 25 million views. "The world is listening. Don't waste it." Marcus read the message twice. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked toward the elevator. The world was listening. Now he had to figure out what to say. Marcus didn't sleep. He sat in the suite for hours watching the city lights blur against the window, replaying every moment of the night in his mind. The look on Mrs. Thornton's face when she realized who he was. The sound of Henderson's voice cracking when he begged for his job. The weight of Elena's tablet, showing him a world that had been watching while he was being dragged toward the door. At 5:47 a.m., his phone rang. "Sir?" Rachel's voice was sharp alert. "The board has moved the meeting up again. They want you at headquarters by 7. "Why the rush?" "The story's gone international. BBC picked it up an hour ago. Reuters just released a feature, and there's a protest forming outside the Atlanta property." Marcus closed his eyes. A protest. Civil rights groups, community organizers. They're calling it a solidarity demonstration. They want you to make a public statement. "Tell them I'll address everything at the board meeting." "Sir, with respect, the board meeting is internal. These people want to hear from you directly. They're not going to wait for a press release that's been sanitized by legal." She was right. He knew she was right. "How many people?" 200 at last count, growing by the hour." Marcus stood and walked to the window. Below, the city was waking up, oblivious to the storm that was building around one hotel lobby. "Get me a car. I'll be down in 20 minutes. "Where are you going?" "To talk to them." Rachel was silent for a moment. Then, "The board isn't going to like that." "The board can wait. These people can't." He ended the call and started getting ready. Not the leather jacket this time, a suit. Dark blue, well-fitted, the kind of armor that commanded attention in boardrooms and press conferences. But before he put on the jacket, he paused. The jacket was part of the uniform. Part of the costume he wore when he needed people to see him as powerful, as legitimate, as someone who belonged. For 27 years he'd been playing that game, dressing the part, speaking the language, making himself palatable to people who would never have given him a second glance otherwise. And last night, for a few hours, he'd stopped playing. He'd walked into his own hotel as himself, just a man in comfortable clothes, asking for a meal. And look what had happened. He put on the jacket anyway. There would be time for authenticity later. Right now, he needed to be effective. The car was waiting when he reached the lobby. The night clerk looked up as he passed, eyes wide with recognition, but Marcus didn't stop to talk. He pushed through the front doors and stepped into the early morning air. The drive took 45 minutes. Rachel called twice more with updates. The protest had grown to over 300 people. CNN had sent a crew, and 2 board members were threatening to call an emergency vote if Marcus didn't appear at headquarters within the hour. He ignored all of it. When the car pulled up to the Horizon Grand Atlanta, Marcus saw the crowd immediately. They filled the sidewalk in front of the main entrance, spilling into the street, holding signs and chanting something he couldn't quite make out. "Sir, I can take you around back," the driver said. "Avoid the crowd." "No, stop here." The driver hesitated. "Are you sure security is—" "I said stop here." The car pulled to the curb. Marcus stepped out into a wall of sound. The chanting resolved into words, "Dignity for all, dignity for all." Cameras swung toward him. Phones rose. The crowd's energy shifted as people recognized his face from the videos that had been playing on loop for the past 12 hours. A woman near the front pushed forward. She was in her 60s, gray hair, pulled back, wearing a jacket that said Atlanta Civil Rights Coalition across the back. "Mr. Webb." Her voice cut through the noise. "I'm Reverend Carolyn Price. We've been waiting for you." Marcus extended his hand. "Reverend, I apologize for keeping you." "Don't apologize, just talk to us." She gestured toward the crowd. "These people came because they've been where you were last night. Not in this hotel maybe, but in 1,000 others. They want to know what you're going to do about it." "I'm going to fix it." "That's what they all say. The question is how." Marcus looked out at the crowd. Young faces, old faces, black, white, brown. Some held signs with slogans. Others held photos, loved ones he realized. People who had been treated like less than human and never got justice. "I can't speak for anyone else," he said loud enough for the nearest reporters to hear. "I can only speak for myself, and I can tell you that what happened to me last night has been happening to people for as long as this country has existed. I got justice because I happen to own the building. But what about everyone who doesn't? What about all the people who get thrown out and have no recourse, no power, no platform?" The crowd had gone quiet. Even the chanting had stopped. "That's the question I've been asking myself all night," Marcus continued. "And I don't have a perfect answer. But I know it starts with accountability. Real accountability. Not just firing the people who got caught, but examining the systems that made their behavior possible. The training that failed. The policies that looked the other way. The culture that made someone feel comfortable saying, 'People like him,' in a crowded lobby." Reverend Price nodded slowly. "Words are easy, Mr. Webb. Actions are harder." "You're right. Which is why I'm not just making promises. I'm making commitments." He pulled out his phone and opened a document Rachel had prepared. "Starting today, Horizon Hotels is implementing mandatory bias training for every employee, from the CEO to the cleaning staff. We're creating an independent oversight board to review discrimination complaints, not internal HR, not managers protecting their own, but outside experts with real authority to investigate and recommend action. We're establishing a fund to compensate guests who've been mistreated in the past and were never properly heard. And we're partnering with organizations like yours to develop best practices that we'll share freely with the entire hospitality industry." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few people started clapping. "But here's the most important thing," Marcus said, raising his voice. "None of this matters if it only happens at Horizon. This problem is bigger than one company. It's bigger than one industry. It's woven into the fabric of how this country operates. And it's not going to change because one CEO had a bad night and decided to do better. He looked directly at the cameras. It's going to change because people like you, the ones who showed up here today, the ones who've been fighting this fight for years, the ones who refuse to be silent, keep demanding more. Keep holding companies accountable. Keep telling your stories even when no one wants to listen. Because eventually, enough people will listen. Enough people will care. And enough people will decide that dignity isn't optional. The applause that followed was different from the polite recognition in the lobby the night before. This was raw, real. The sound of people who had been waiting a long time to hear someone in power say what they already knew. Reverend Price stepped closer and spoke quietly so only Marcus could hear. You know, this is just the beginning. The hard part comes next. I know. The board's going to push back. Your shareholders are going to demand you quiet down. The media's going to move on to the next story, and you'll be left with the work no one wants to do. I know that too. And you're still willing to do it. Marcus met her eyes. Reverend, I've been fighting this fight my whole life. The only difference is now I have the resources to actually make a dent. She studied him for a long moment. Then she extended her hand again. I believe you, she said. Don't make me regret it. I won't. He shook her hand, then turned and walked into the hotel. The crowd parted to let him through, some reaching out to touch his arm, his shoulder. A few whispered thank you. One older man, tears streaming down his face, simply nodded. Inside the lobby was chaos. Staff rushed back and forth, phones ringing constantly, a team of PR people huddled in the corner, arguing about damage control. David Chen, the general manager who had been conveniently unavailable the night before, was standing near the front desk, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Mr. Webb? He hurried forward, hand extended. I can't tell you how sorry I am. If I had known. Where were you last night, David? Chen's face went pale. I was at a conference in Nashville, a leadership seminar. I left Mrs. Thornton in charge because you trusted her judgment. Yes, I did. And in 12 years you never noticed any patterns, any complaints, any signs that she might be treating certain guests differently than others. Chen's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man watching his career disintegrate in slow motion. I assumed everything was under control. The numbers were good. Guest satisfaction scores were guest satisfaction scores. Marcus repeated the words like they tasted bitter. You know what doesn't show up in satisfaction scores, David? The people who never come back. The people who tell their friends to stay away. The people who write off your entire company because of one interaction that made them feel less than human. Sir, You're not fired, not yet. But you're on notice. I want a full audit of every complaint filed at this property in the last decade. I want interviews with every current employee. And I want a report on my desk by Friday explaining exactly how this culture developed under your watch. Chen nodded frantically. Yes, sir, absolutely. Whatever you need. What I need is for you to do better. What I need is for everyone in this building to understand that what happened last night wasn't an aberration. It was a symptom. And if we don't treat the disease, it's going to kill everything I've built. He left Chen standing in the middle of the lobby and headed for the elevators. Rachel was waiting on the executive floor. She fell into step beside him as he walked toward the boardroom. The protest is making news, she said. Your speech is already trending. #DignityForAll is the top hashtag on Twitter. Good. The board is less happy. Margaret Chen called twice. She wants to know why you went to the protest instead of coming straight here. Tell her I was doing my job. She's going to push for a vote of no confidence. Marcus stopped walking. On what grounds? She's saying you acted recklessly, that you damaged the brand by making this public instead of handling it quietly, that you've turned a personnel issue into a national scandal. A personnel issue. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. A woman was told she didn't belong in a hotel I built. Security was called because she wanted dinner. And Margaret wants to call that a personnel issue. I'm just telling you what she's saying. I know, and I appreciate it. He started walking again. How many votes does she have? At least 3 confirmed, maybe 4. That's not a majority. It's not far from one. They reached the boardroom doors. Marcus paused, hand on the handle. Rachel, do you remember what I told you when I hired you? She nodded. You said you didn't want someone who would tell you what you wanted to hear. You wanted someone who would tell you the truth, even when it hurt. And what's the truth right now? She hesitated only briefly. The truth is that you did the right thing. The truth is that most CEOs would have buried this, paid off the staff, and moved on. The truth is that what you're doing could cost you the company. And I think that's exactly why it matters. Marcus smiled, a real smile, the first one in hours. Then let's go remind the board why they hired me in the first place. He pushed open the doors. 12 faces looked up from a long mahogany table. Some were friendly, some were neutral. A few were openly hostile. Margaret Chen sat at the far end, arms crossed, expression carved from ice. She was in her late 50s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, the kind of woman who had fought her way to the top of corporate America and never forgot the battles it took to get there. Marcus, her voice was clipped. So glad you could finally join us. Margaret. He took his seat at the head of the table. I understand you have concerns. Concerns is an understatement. You've turned this company into a circus. Every news outlet in the country is running footage of you being handcuffed in your own lobby. Our stock is down 8% in pre-market trading. And instead of coming here to address the crisis, you went outside to give speeches to protesters. I went outside to listen to people who've been ignored for too long. You went outside to grandstand, to turn yourself into a civil rights hero at the expense of shareholder value. Shareholder value. Marcus looked around the table. Is that what we're calling human dignity now? A threat to shareholder value? Don't twist my words. This isn't about dignity. It's about judgment. You had 100 ways to handle last night's incident quietly. You chose the most explosive option possible. I chose transparency. I chose accountability. I chose to show the world that Horizon Hotels doesn't sweep discrimination under the rug. You chose to humiliate your own staff on camera. You chose to fire people without proper documentation. You chose to make yourself the story instead of containing the damage. The damage was already done. It had been done for years by people who thought they could treat guests however they wanted because no one was watching. Marcus's voice hardened. Well, now everyone's watching. And they're going to see whether this company stands for what it claims to stand for, or whether it's just another corporation that talks about values and abandons them the moment they become inconvenient. Margaret leaned forward. This board has a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. What you're doing, this crusade you're on, it's putting that responsibility at risk. What I'm doing is protecting the long-term viability of this company. Do you know what destroys brands, Margaret? Not scandals, not protests. What destroys brands is hypocrisy. It's saying one thing and doing another. It's printing everyone welcome on your brochures, while your staff decides who actually belongs. Pretty words, but they don't change the numbers. The numbers will recover. They always do when you do the right thing. What won't recover, what can never be recovered, is trust. Once people decide that Horizon Hotels isn't safe for them, that reputation sticks, it spreads, it becomes the truth. A voice from the other end of the table cut in. Walter Hensley, the man from the lobby, the one who had shaken Marcus's hand and called what he'd done real leadership. If I may, Walter said, looking around at his fellow board members. I was there last night. I watched the whole thing unfold. And I can tell you that what Marcus did wasn't recklessness. It was courage. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Walter, let me finish. I've been on this board for 15 years. I've watched this company grow from a regional chain to an international brand, and the reason it grew, The only reason is because Marcus built something people believed in, not just rooms and restaurants, a promise. A promise that this company would be different. He stood up slowly the way old men do when they want their words to carry weight. Last night that promise was broken, not by Marcus, by the people who were supposed to represent us. And instead of hiding from it, instead of paying lawyers to make it go away, Marcus stood up and said, "This is wrong and I'm going to fix it." That's not a liability. That's an asset. That's the kind of leadership that makes people want to work for us, stay with us, invest in us. Margaret's jaw tightened. Sentiment doesn't pay dividends. No, but reputation does. And right now, thanks to what Marcus did, Horizon Hotels is the company that confronts prejudice instead of enabling it. That's a story people want to be part of. That's a brand people want to support. He looked directly at Marcus. I move that we table any discussion of no confidence and instead authorize a full review of company policies as Marcus has proposed. All in favor? Hands went up around the table. 1, 2, 5, 7, 9. Margaret's face went rigid. She didn't raise her hand, but she didn't speak either. The vote was already decided. Motion carries, Rachel announced quietly from her seat near the door. Marcus felt the tension in his shoulders release just slightly. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself. "Thank you, Walter," he said. "Thank you all. I know this isn't easy. Change never is. But I promise you the company we're building is worth the discomfort." Margaret stood abruptly, gathering her papers. "This isn't over, Marcus. The shareholders will have their say." "They will, and when they do, I hope they remember what we stood for when it mattered." She swept out of the room without another word. A few board members exchanged glances, but no one followed her. Walter approached Marcus as the room began to empty. "That was close. Closer than I wanted. Margaret has allies, powerful ones. She's not going to let this go." "I know. But I can't let fear of board politics dictate how I run this company. If I do, I've already lost." Walter nodded slowly. "You know, when I watched you last night, the way you stood there, not fighting back, just waiting, I thought about my father. He was a porter. Worked the trains for 40 years. Got called every name you can imagine and smiled through all of it because he had a family to feed. I'm sorry." "Don't be. He was the strongest man I ever knew. Strength isn't about fighting. It's about enduring. About refusing to let other people's hatred change who you are." Walter put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You reminded me of him last night. That's the highest compliment I know how to give." Marcus didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded. Walter squeezed his shoulder once, then walked away. Alone in the boardroom, Marcus looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there, 300 people were still gathered, still chanting, still believing that change was possible. He owed them an answer. He owed them action. And for the first time since the night began, he felt ready to deliver. His phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "The file is ready. Everything Mrs. Thornton buried. It's worse than we thought." Marcus typed back, "Send it to legal and to the press." The response came instantly. "Are you sure this could get ugly?" He looked at the message for a long moment. Then he typed his reply. "It's already ugly. The only question is whether we clean it up or let it fester." He hit send and walked out of the boardroom, ready to face whatever came next. The file landed like a bomb. 3 days after Marcus authorized its release, every major news outlet in the country had run stories about what they were calling the Horizon Papers. Hundreds of documented complaints, years of buried grievances, a systematic pattern of discrimination that reached far beyond one hotel lobby. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Former guests came forward by the dozens, then hundreds. They told stories that echoed each other with devastating consistency. The cold reception at check-in, the unnecessary ID requests, the security guards who followed them through lobbies and restaurants, the room service that never arrived, the reservations that mysteriously disappeared. Marcus read every single account. He sat in his office at headquarters, scrolling through testimonials that stretched back more than a decade. Each one carried its own weight of pain and frustration. Each one represented a person who had walked into a Horizon property expecting hospitality and walked out feeling diminished. Rachel knocked on his door at 11 p.m. on the fourth night. "Sir, you need to rest. You've been at this for 18 hours. There's one more folder. There will always be one more folder. The question is whether you're going to kill yourself reading them all." Marcus leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. She was right. Of course she was right. How bad is the fallout? Depends on how you measure it. Rachel stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. Stock is down another 3%. Margaret Chen has been making calls. She's trying to build support for an emergency shareholder meeting. And the lawsuit count is up to 47. 47. Class action is being organized. Lawyers are circling like sharks. Good. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Good. Every one of those lawsuits represents someone who is wronged, someone who deserves to be heard. If we have to pay damages, we pay damages. That's the cost of accountability. The board isn't going to see it that way. The board can see it however they want. I'm not running from this. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down in the chair across from his desk. "Can I tell you something? Off the record." "Since when do we have an on the record?" A small smile crossed her face. "Fair point. I just wanted to say, I've worked for a lot of executives. Men who talked about values but folded the moment those values cost them anything. You're different. What you're doing, it matters. To people like me." Marcus looked at her. In 5 years of working together, Rachel had never mentioned her own experiences. Never made anything personal. People like you. I grew up in Oakland. My parents were immigrants, Vietnamese. They worked in hotels their whole lives, cleaning, cooking, doing the jobs no one else wanted, and they came home with stories. Her voice tightened. Stories about guests who treated them like furniture. Managers who looked right through them. A whole industry that depended on their labor but never saw them as human. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be better. That's what you're doing. She stood up. That's why I came to work for you. Because I believed you actually meant the things you said. And these last few days, you've proven me right. Marcus didn't know how to respond. He'd spent so long being the person in charge, the one making decisions, the one carrying the weight. It was rare that anyone acknowledged what that weight felt like. "Thank you, Rachel. That means more than you know." She nodded and headed for the door. Then she paused. "There's one more thing. Elena Vasquez called. She wants to see you. Said it's urgent." "Send her up." 20 minutes later, Elena walked into his office. She looked different than she had 5 nights ago, more confident, less afraid. The young woman who'd trembled while speaking truth to power had been replaced by someone who understood what that truth had cost and what it had purchased. "Mr. Webb, thank you for seeing me. Marcus, please." He gestured to the chair Rachel had vacated. "What's on your mind?" Elena sat down, hands clasped in her lap. "I've been getting calls. From the press, from advocacy groups, from people who saw the videos and want to interview me. They keep asking the same question." "What question?" "Why I spoke up, why I didn't stay quiet like everyone else." "What do you tell them?" "The truth. That I was terrified. That I almost didn't say anything. That the only reason I did was because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." She paused. "But there's something I haven't told anyone. Something I wanted to tell you first." Marcus waited. "When I was 16, my family took a trip to New York. It was the first real vacation we'd ever had. My dad had saved for years. He wanted to show us the Statue of Liberty, Times Square, all the places he'd seen in movies when he was growing up in Guatemala." Her voice grew quieter. We stayed at a nice hotel. Nothing fancy, but nice. And on the first night, we went down to the restaurant for dinner. The hostess looked at us, looked at my dad's accent, my mom's clothes, and told us there weren't any tables available. The place was half empty. We could see the empty tables right behind her, but she just smiled and said we might want to try somewhere else. Elena's eyes were wet, but she didn't look away. My dad didn't argue. He just nodded and let us out. And I remember thinking, why isn't he fighting? Why is he letting her treat us like this? I was so angry at him. For years, I was angry. And now I understand. He wasn't being weak. He was being strategic. He knew that fighting would only make things worse. That we'd be the ones who got blamed, who got removed, who got labeled as troublemakers. So he swallowed his pride and found somewhere else for us to eat. She looked directly at Marcus. But I also know that swallowing your pride doesn't make the wound heal. It just buries it deeper. And eventually it has to come out. Either you speak or you break. What happened to your father? He died 3 years ago, heart attack. The doctor said stress was a contributing factor. Her voice cracked slightly. He spent his whole life being careful, being strategic, not making waves, and in the end, all that pressure just crushed him. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He thought of Dorothy Williams, the woman who had saved for 2 years to take her grandchildren on vacation. He thought of all the stories he'd read in the last 4 days, all the people who had carried wounds they never got the chance to heal. I'm sorry about your father. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I want you to understand why I did what I did, why I couldn't stay quiet, even though every instinct told me to. You honored him by speaking when he couldn't. Elena nodded, tears finally spilling over. That's exactly it. That's exactly what it felt like. Like all those years of silence had built up to that one moment, and if I didn't use it, I'd be wasting everything he taught me about endurance. Marcus stood and walked around the desk. He sat down in the chair next to hers, not behind the barrier of authority, but beside her as an equal. Elena, what you did took more courage than most people will ever have. You risked your job, your future, everything for a stranger you'd never met. That's not something you learn. That's something you are. I don't feel brave. I just feel tired. That's what bravery feels like. The movies get it wrong. It's not the absence of fear. It's being afraid and doing it anyway, and then having to live with the consequences. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What happens now? Now we build something better. And I want you to be part of it. Me. I'm creating a new position. Chief Experience Officer. Someone whose only job is to make sure that what happened to you, to your father, to all the people in those files, never happens again at a Horizon property. Elena stared at him. You're offering me a C-suite position? I've been with the company 8 months. You've demonstrated more integrity in 8 months than most people do in a career. Experience can be learned. Character can't. I don't know what to say. Say yes, or say no. But don't say you're not qualified, because that's exactly the kind of thinking that kept people like you out of rooms like this for too long. A long moment passed. Then Elena smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Yes, I'll do it. Good. Marcus stood and extended his hand. Welcome to the executive team. She shook it firmly, and in that grip, something shifted. A passing of the torch he hadn't known he was carrying. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in front of a crowd of 3,000 people. The National Civil Rights Conference had invited him to deliver the keynote address. The irony wasn't lost on him. A month ago, he'd been handcuffed in his own lobby, and now he was being celebrated as a champion of equality. But he didn't feel like a champion. He felt like a man who had gotten lucky. Lucky that there were cameras. Lucky that people like Elena had spoken up. Lucky that the world had been watching at the exact moment when the truth couldn't be hidden. Reverend Carolyn Price introduced him to the crowd. She talked about the videos, the protests, the policy changes Horizon had announced. She talked about the ripple effects, other companies examining their own practices, other employees finding the courage to speak up. But what strikes me most, she said, is what Mr. Webb said when he walked out of that lobby. He said, "I am not the victim of this story. I am the conclusion." Those words have echoed across this country because they speak to something we all feel. The knowledge that our struggles are not endings. They are beginnings. They are the raw material from which we build something better. She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Webb, the stage is yours." He walked to the podium. The crowd was silent, expectant. Thousands of faces looking up at him, waiting for wisdom he wasn't sure he possessed. "I want to tell you about a night," he began. "Not the night you've all seen on video. A different night. 25 years ago." He paused, letting the memory surface. "I was 22 years old. I'd just graduated from business school, first in my family to get a college degree. I had a meeting with an investor who could have funded my first business. A small hotel, 60 rooms, nothing fancy." The crowd was utterly still. "I showed up early, wore my best suit, practiced my pitch 100 times. And when I walked into that hotel lobby, the manager took one look at me and said there must have been some mistake. Said the restaurant was fully booked. Said I might be more comfortable somewhere else." He felt the old pain rise up as fresh as it had been a quarter-century ago. "I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I just left. Found a diner down the street and ordered coffee I couldn't afford to nurse while I watched my opportunity walk away." The investor never rescheduled. The deal fell through. And for 3 years I worked 2 jobs, saved every penny, and rebuilt from scratch. Eventually I got another shot, and another, and eventually I built the company you've all been reading about. He looked out at the crowd. "But here's what I want you to understand. The man who walked into that hotel lobby last month wasn't the CEO of Horizon Hotels. He was that 22-year-old kid in his only suit, still carrying the weight of every door that had ever been closed in his face. Because that weight never goes away. It doesn't matter how successful you become, how much money you make, how many buildings have your name on them. When someone looks at you and decides you don't belong based on nothing but the color of your skin, it takes you right back to every time it happened before." His voice grew stronger. "I didn't go into that hotel to catch anyone doing wrong. I went because I needed to know if the promise I'd made, the promise that everyone would be welcome, was being kept. And what I found broke my heart. But it also reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Something that 22-year-old knew, but the CEO had started to lose sight of." He leaned into the microphone. "Change doesn't come from the top. It never has. Change comes from the people who refuse to accept the world as it is. The people who speak up when it would be easier to stay quiet. The people who document, who witness, who demand better." In that lobby there were dozens of people who saw what was happening. Most of them did nothing. But a few, a young man with a phone, a clerk who risked her job to tell the truth, guests who spoke up when they could have looked away. They're the reason any of this mattered. They're the reason the story didn't end with me being thrown out on the street. So when you ask me what I've learned from all this, that's my answer. One person can make a difference, but many people standing together refusing to be silent, that's what makes change inevitable. The applause started slowly, then built into something overwhelming. People rose to their feet. The sound washed over him like a wave. But Marcus didn't feel triumphant. He felt humble, grateful, and more determined than ever to earn the faith these people were placing in him. After the speech, he made his way through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting thanks, listening to stories. Every person who approached him had their own experience of being dismissed, diminished, denied. And every one of them wanted to know, would things really be different now? He didn't have a perfect answer. But he had an honest one. "I don't know if the world will change overnight. But I know that we have a choice every day, in every interaction, to treat people with dignity or to strip it away. And every time we choose dignity, we make the world a little more like the one we want to live in. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start. 3 months later, Marcus returned to the Horizon Grand Atlanta. The lobby looked the same, marble floors, fountain-soft lighting. But something had shifted. He could feel it in the air, in the way staff moved, in the energy of the space. Elena met him at the front desk. She was wearing a blazer now, her new title embroidered on the name tag, Chief Experience Officer. "Welcome back, sir." "Marcus?" "Marcus." She smiled. "We've been expecting you." "How's the new training program?" 97% completion rate across all properties. We've had some pushback from a few regional managers, but nothing we can't handle. "And the complaint system?" "Completely rebuilt. Independent review board meets weekly. Average response time is down from 3 weeks to 48 hours. "Good. And Henderson?" Elena's expression softened. "He finished the program in Arizona. Top of his class, actually. He's been assigned to the training team, helps teach new security staff about implicit bias and de-escalation." "You're kidding." "I'm not. He's actually good at it. Turns out having made a mistake yourself makes you better at helping others avoid the same one." Marcus shook his head slowly. "People never stop surprising you." "That's what you taught me. Give them a chance to be better, and some of them will take it." They walked through the lobby together, past the spot where Marcus had stood in handcuffs, past the counter where Mrs. Thornton had sneered at him, past the fountain where he'd waited for justice to arrive. None of it looked different, but everything had changed. "There's someone who wants to see you," Elena said. "She's in the restaurant." Marcus stopped. "Who?" "You'll see." He walked into the restaurant alone. It was mid-afternoon quiet, only a few tables occupied. At a corner booth, a woman sat with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Gray hair, worn face, a jacket that said Atlanta Civil Rights Coalition. Reverend Carolyn Price. She looked up as he approached and smiled. "Mr. Webb, thank you for coming." "Reverend, I didn't expect to see you here." "I wanted to visit the place where it all started. See it with my own eyes." She gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit. Talk with me." Marcus slid into the booth. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Being back here." He considered the question. "Strange. Like visiting a battlefield after the war is over." "Is it over?" "No, it's never over. But this particular fight, the one that started here, I think we won." Carolyn nodded slowly. "You know, when I first heard about what happened to you, my initial reaction was anger. Another black man humiliated. Another company that would apologize and move on. Same story, different day. What changed your mind?" "You did. The way you handled it. You could have burned everything down, made it about revenge. Instead, you made it about change." "Revenge would have felt good for about 5 minutes." "Exactly. And that's what separates leaders from everyone else. The ability to see past the immediate satisfaction to the long-term impact." She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. Faded, worn, clearly decades old. A young black man in a porter's uniform standing in front of a train station. "My father," she said, "worked the rails for 30 years, never complained, never made waves, died without ever being treated like he mattered." Marcus looked at the photo. The man's face was calm, steady, patient, the kind of face that had learned to endure. "He would have liked you," Carolyn continued. "He believed that change was possible. He just didn't live long enough to see it. I'm sorry he didn't." "Don't be sorry. Be the change he believed in." She took back the photograph and tucked it into her bag. "That's why I came here today. To tell you that what you're doing matters. Not just to the people who'll benefit from it, but to all the people who came before. The ones who fought and lost. The ones who carried the weight so we wouldn't have to." Marcus felt the words settle into him, filling spaces he hadn't known were empty. "I'll try to be worthy of that." "You already are." Carolyn stood and gathered her things. Now I have a march to organize. Police accountability, if you can believe it. The work never ends. If you ever need support funding logistics, whatever, call me. She smiled. I'll hold you to that. She walked out of the restaurant, leaving Marcus alone with his coffee and his thoughts. He sat there for a long time, watching the afternoon light shift across the tables. Thinking about his father, who had worked 3 jobs to put food on the table. Thinking about the 22-year-old who had walked into a hotel lobby full of hope and walked out with nothing but determination. Thinking about all the battles he'd fought to get here, all the doors he'd pushed open, all the people who had told him he didn't belong. His phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Board meeting in an hour. Margaret Chen withdrew her no-confidence motion. She's resigning from the board effective immediately. Marcus read the message twice. Then he typed back, "Send her my regards, and my thanks." Thanks for what? For reminding me what I'm fighting for. He finished his coffee and stood up. The restaurant staff nodded as he passed, not with the forced deference of employees trying to impress the boss, but with genuine respect. Recognition. Understanding. He walked back through the lobby past Elena, who was training a new clerk on the proper way to greet guests. Past the fountain that had witnessed his humiliation and his triumph. Past the spot where he'd stood in handcuffs, silent and steady, waiting for the moment when truth would finally break through. At the revolving doors, he paused and looked back. This building was just glass and marble and carefully designed spaces. But it was also something more. It was a promise made manifest. A belief that hospitality could mean something real. That every person who walked through those doors deserved to feel welcome, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. For years, that promise had been broken. Quietly, systematically, by people who had forgotten or never believed in what it meant. But promises could be renewed. Trust could be rebuilt. And change, real change, could take root in the most unlikely soil. Marcus pushed through the doors and stepped out into the Atlanta afternoon. The sun was warm on his face. The city hummed around him, millions of people living their lives, fighting their battles, carrying their own weights. He thought about Dorothy Williams, who had saved for 2 years to give her grandchildren a memory, and received humiliation instead. He thought about Elena's father, who had swallowed his pride in a New York restaurant, so his family wouldn't see him fight a battle he couldn't win. He thought about Reverend Price's father standing patient and dignified in front of a train station, believing in a future he would never see. And he thought about himself, the kid from Tennessee who had been told 1,000 times that he didn't belong, who had built an empire anyway, who had stood in handcuffs in his own lobby and refused to let anyone else define his worth. The weight was still there. It would always be there. Every slight he'd ever endured, every door that had been closed in his face, every moment when someone had looked at him and seen only what they expected to see. But weight could be transformed. It could become fuel. It could become foundation. It could become the raw material from which legacies were built. Marcus walked toward his car, steps steady, head high. Behind him, the hotel stood gleaming in the sunlight, not just a building, but a testament. A monument to every person who had ever been told they didn't belong and refused to believe it. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over. There would always be another lobby, another manager, another moment when dignity was tested. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus Webb felt something that had nothing to do with victory or vindication. He felt hope. Not the naive hope of someone who believed the world would change overnight, but the earned hope of someone who had seen the worst of human nature and discovered that the best was still possible. He got into the car and closed the door. The driver glanced back. "Where to, sir?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Home," he said finally. "I'm going home." The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the horizon Grand Atlanta behind. But Marcus didn't look back. He didn't need to. The past was where it belonged. The future was waiting. And dignity, the quiet, unshakable dignity that no one could take away, was exactly where it had always been. Inside him. Unbroken. Eternal. Because In the end, that was the only truth that mattered. Not the wealth he'd accumulated, not the buildings he'd built, not the headlines or the speeches or the standing ovations. Just this: he had stood when others wanted him to fall. He had spoken when others wanted him silent. He had remained himself when the whole world tried to tell him who he was supposed to be. And that stubborn, beautiful, irreducible act of being was something no one could ever take away. Not now. Not ever. The car merged into traffic, carrying Marcus Webb toward whatever came next. And somewhere in Atlanta, in a hotel lobby, rebuilt on the foundation of truth, a young clerk smiled at a guest and said the words that meant everything. "Welcome, we've been expecting you."